This is Steve Greenhut, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
As Steve's on the show, it's great to have you on, man. I'm fascinated by what we call the California water wars here in California, but I'm fascinated by for a couple different reasons. So I'm a former combat guy. I've done a lot of time in conflict zones, and as we pull back from Afghanistan, I see a lot of the same institutional, organizational problems that I see when I look at the water wars. And everybody, I'm going to put the link up for Steven's book, and you'll get a chance to buy that, but hear his point of view. So I think what I'd like to do is, like, there's a lot of interviews with you out there talking about the basics of it, so people should go look at those things. But let's kind of get into the players and the different interests, because there are so many of them, and then we'll just kind of work our way out from there and talk about some possible solutions and everything. But how would you, who's on the lineup in terms of all of the different interests that we have to manage when we try to set up? I mean, California is a massive state, right? We've got, 40 million people here, and it's hard to, you can be up in Goose Lake, upper northeastern California, and not be within 12 hours of San Diego. It's a big place.
Oh yeah, I've been to every one of the 58 counties, and I've been all the way up there in Modoc County, and it's a world apart.
Right.
I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm hearing myself back.
Do you want to put headphones on?
Yeah, maybe I better do that because I'm hearing an echo.
Yeah. So while he does that, the water wars here in California deal with a number of groups that are trying to figure out how to manage water. Southern California and its massive demands for water. You have the Central Valley, which feeds a lot of the nation and California, and all of these different players. And so Stephen's going to lay out for us like who these players are and what their interests are. And I guess before we go any further, too, maybe one of the things we should discuss, Stephen, before we even get into the roll call of who's involved, just because, and it's dumb to have to do this, but just because people will dismiss expertise because they perceive it to be Democrat, Republican, Trumper, all the other things. So you're a journalist, first and foremost, and I would say in the traditional sense, you're not an activist journalist, you're someone who looks at a problem. Can you talk a little bit about your pedigree so that we can understand that you're a person who has a significant position on this and you've done your work and you're not just a partisan?
Right. This is
We're having some technical difficulties here. You're on mute somehow now. Let me see if I can get you off of mute. Unmute.
My apologies. Yeah. So
technology.
Yeah. So it's a journalist book. It's not a. I don't pretend to be a water expert. I've did a lot of interviews and research, and I've always been interested in California water. Great interest in the state and its geography, and have, as I mentioned, been to pretty much every corner of the state. And I have a point of view, though, and the point of view in the book is that we need to promote policies that are less ideological and are just designed to get more water into the system. So, California largely, turned itself into a giant plumbing system, right? So, without the system of dams and canals, we were an entirely flood-prone state. I mean, Leland Stanford, when he was inaugurated as governor, had to take a canoe to the Capitol. All of Orange County was a giant lake at one point after a large flood event. So we've always gone back and forth between these droughts and massive floods. So our water systems have allowed us to grow to the population. We're almost at 40 million. We can't quite hit 40 million. The state's population has actually declined a little this year, but we haven't built any major water infrastructure since the 1970s, or, maybe a little bit. We had one dam in Southern California, one reservoir, but we haven't really invested and built the infrastructure needed as the state's population has doubled. So as a result, when you have severe droughts, we're not prepared for them. So you were asking about the players. Well, water, it's all largely controlled by the government here. So we've got the, all the different water districts and the state water officials, the agricultural interests, more so in the past than now, have, been dominant. but the environmental interests have been increasingly dominant. And since the 70s, the whole point of view has changed quite a bit. So I went back through a lot of historical documents, and we had quite, there was, and I detail it in a chapter in my book, this old kind of can-do attitude about building things. We can just build whatever we need, and to ensure that the state has the infrastructure it needs. Now, I'm not advocating a return totally to that, to that world. We certainly need to be concerned about environmental issues, but we've shifted much further in the other direction than we should have, and haven't been building the water infrastructure that's needed. So the environmental interests are key in that they are geared up to fight almost any sort of proposal, and are trying to turn as much of the state's rivers back, into wild rivers. And so we end up with these absurd fights, in the middle of the last drought, which seems like an eternity ago, but that seemed like an extremely severe drought at the time. I went out to New Melones out in near Copperopolis in the Sierra foothills, and it was an irrigation district. And the feds and the state were going to largely empty, the reservoir to save a handful of hatchery-raised fish that were going to be eaten on the way out to the Pacific Ocean by invasive species anyway. So, the basic numbers: 50% of the state's water is used for environmental purposes. Essentially, it flows to Pacific Ocean. 40% is for ag, 10% is for urban users. A total of 5.7% are for residential users. So, if we're going to just totally focus on that 5.7% on conservation, and even we're seeing rationing now, it's a point of diminishing return. So my books looks at the history of California water, and talks about some of the many things we can do to ensure that there's more water, in the system.
One of the when we look at all of the, I guess you would say all of the players and what their interests are, we get this roll call of marketing slogans, that kind of thing. So, and we'll just briefly go through, and I'll be unfair and paint them with the big brush and let you sort of sort it out. But we have the big ag. We always talk about big ag, big oil, big pharma, big. We don't know what that means. I don't know when something stops being big and becomes medium, and what we do. So we kind of turn them into demons, but they are the ones growing the food in large part. We also have to deal with the fact that big corporations do things that are odious and harmful to people. They lie and they cheat and they steal and they do everything they can to make that profit. I mean, we've seen this over and over again. And then you have folks like, and I'll just call the Sierra Club out, where they are activists and ideologues. And so they're, and God bless. I mean, I love that they're out there for the little guy and trying to fight for the environment, but they want to keep oil and gas in the ground instead of using it. And that's the problem at some point when you have 40 million people. They want to turn rivers into wild rivers, and simultaneously also bring in social justice and environmental justice and these other things, and almost kind of, it's like, hey, you can't just juggle 5 balls. You now have to juggle 15 balls in the air to get through these things. So they're sort of a problematic partner as well. We have Southern California. There's a lot of us down here. I'm in Orange County. When I dig, it's like digging on an old riverbed. It's full of rocks, and it's so hard to dig into. But we sure as heck have a lot of green space, and we don't want to turn our lawns into desertification kind of, things. And there's just all kinds of problems. The Delta needs support. We bring in invasive species, but then they become part of the ecosystem. And so, the farmers often seem kind of callous when it comes, it's a stupid 3-inch fish. But the reality is that fish is there. So we have all these competing interests. How on earth do we support, or how do we even get to the point where we can have a conversation where we can support what we need to do in this multi-incentivized, multi-tiered system? I mean, you can't just say almond growers can't grow almonds, or alfalfa growers can't grow alfalfa anymore, because someone has to grow that stuff. That stuff has to be grown somewhere, and we can't just push our problem in California off to Utah or to Israel or to Iraq and say, you guys figure out what to do with it, because that's just as shitty as getting it wrong. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on all of that, man? It's complex.
Wow, yeah, there are a lot of points you raised. Well, one of the solutions. Sure, we need farms. We need the food. The Central Valley is one of the most productive farm regions in the world, and the extreme variety of produce that we have. We need the farms, but it doesn't necessarily mean you don't necessarily have to be growing alfalfa in the Imperial Valley, which is one of the driest places on earth. So a lot of that goes back to our, some of our system of water rights, and I'm, advocate for protecting the system of water rights, but there are also quite a few subsidies built into the into the agricultural system too. So pricing, better pricing. I have a chapter on better pricing, so that water, water could be more easily bought and sold and sent to its highest and best use, like we do with anything. And right now you can trade water; the state allows it, but I print the decision tree. All the bureaucrats have to approve all the different beneficial uses. It's like one of those Rube Goldberg cartoons, right, where the this hits that and hits that. So it's this complex system of a regulatory approval. So that makes it so it's a government controlled system filled with subsidies and political interests. I mean, we're shocked that political interests have power in a politically driven system, and we have the bureaucrats, and a lot of these environmental groups are litigation machines. Anything that gets proposed, they oppose. I mean, the California Coastal Commission is opposing a desalination project in Huntington Beach, which is almost identical to the one in Carlsbad, which can meet 9% of San Diego County's water needs. They're based on concerns about plankton, floating whale food. One of the opponents, one of the environmental groups that opposed that project, they said something to the effect of, the Pacific Ocean isn't limitless. Well, actually, it isn't technically limitless, but it is basically limitless. And the idea that a little plankton removed from the ecosystem at one point on the Southern California coast is going to harm the Pacific Ocean is fairly ridiculous. So we have all these interests that just oppose everything, right? CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, makes it really easy to sue projects. State legislators have opposed the Cadiz project out in the Mojave Desert to tap a Rhode Island-sized aquifer and send the water on the Colorado River aqueduct to Southern California. So the water problem is solved around the margins. We need to feed more water into the system through a variety of things. Private projects like Cadiz, desalination. Now, desal is an expensive form of water, but a lot of the costs of imported water are hidden through the many bonds and the state expenditures, and we don't always see all of those costs. And the cost of imported water is going up, and the cost of desal through technology is going down. But the main thing is, if you have a little more desal, you're having a consistent form of water, and we need to feed more water into the system. It benefits farmers. It benefits the public. It also benefits the environment. The Carmel River is being depleted over in the Monterey Bay area because there's such a demand for water and not enough water. And a desal plant, which is being opposed by environmentalists up there in Marina, would help save that river. So that's my point of view in the book that I argue for. I look at the need for more infrastructure development, better pricing, water recycling. You're in Orange County. Orange County has the best water recycling system, and environmentalists do support that. And that's one of the big solutions, and the state has been supportive of that. But it's just everything takes so long, and it takes so we waited until we have another drought. Instead of planning ahead after the last drought, we waited until we have a new drought, and now we have this drought, and everyone's like, what do we do? Well, these projects take time, and it's hard to, so now we're looking at water rationing in the Bay Area and in certain water districts, which is, that's not a good idea. And then our water bills is unlike, gasoline. The price of gasoline fluctuates pretty dramatically. When it goes up, we drive less. When it goes down, we drive more. Our water bills are always going up, but they're not tied closely to the amount of we use. So people naturally conserve when pricing is better.
I want to go back and talk about the supply chain that we have for food. I mean, we feed, again, almost 40 million people here with the Central Valley and the other areas of California that grow food, but also a giant piece of the nation. And we could also include part of Arizona in this breadbasket. We had Megan Konar on the show, and she talks about the movement of food and the movement of water. That's what she studies as a PhD. And it's this massive system that has, in spite of all the external things, it's figured out the best way to move things and the right things to have in the right spots. And so to change these systems, there's a cost to that as well that's hidden, whether you're talking about moving water or changing crops. I mean, if a farmer says, hey, we're going to grow almonds now, and they go out and they spend $100,000 and then it's not a viable crop in 2 years, there's a hit there that has to be absorbed. And, these things aren't done as easily as we want. And as soon as we have the government come in and start incentivizing or de-incentivizing certain crops or certain consumption patterns, again, as you know, it's bad. And then I want to add in this piece too, because this goes right up the alley for another book you wrote. When we start to change these things and build whole new systems or update systems, there's a lot of eminent domain problems. I mean, we can't even get a train built because every square foot of that train is an extra $1 billion because there's a whole industry based upon lawsuits for these things, right? Like you can make yourself a millionaire by focusing on the lawsuits that tie these things up, whether they're frivolous or a legitimate environmental thing. That's sort of up to the person, but there's a whole industry in tying these things up and consulting on how to do that. And so we're good at fighting. We're not good at solving these problems, Stephen.
Well, yeah, on the rail issue, I mean, the eminent domain battles have not been the key part of the cost, and of course, we have to, the state has to compensate people. It goes back to the Constitution, and I'm glad for it. They have to, reimburse people for the land that's taken. The problem is that our state spends way more than most other states in all of the infrastructure that it does. So our highway building costs, I don't have the numbers on the top of my head, but they're far above the national average. And our cost per mile, we have these, encrusted bureaucracies and all the union work rules and the large number, what the LAO, the Legislative Analyst's Office, a few years back looked at all the thousands of unnecessary Caltrans employees. A private business, if it has unnecessary employees, they become ex-employees. I mean, it's just the reality. So our state seems to operate as a giant jobs program. And of course, the costs of everything go up. And we look at the pension costs and the extremely generous pensions for California public employees, which of course, personnel costs are the highest cost of everything. So we just spend more money on everything. On the high-speed rail, the problem is it's not driven by consumer demand. It's driven by what politicians think, and they think that we ought to get around by rail. And that's going to help deal with climate change, as opposed to what the proposed project that goes from the LA basin to Las Vegas, the privately funded project. That at least I don't know the details of the project, but that at least corresponds to a demand. And so markets work more efficiently. They provide better goods. They maintain what they own much better than government. Government's disastrous that way. So Caltrans, I remember this news series that Caltrans is the state's biggest slumlord, how they treat all the excess properties that they have. The Oroville Dam, the near collapse of the two spillways. I mean, the state doesn't maintain its it's in water infrastructure. It doesn't. So we're allowing the government in this state to increasingly drive these decisions. And the problem with the high-speed rail is that the costs keep ballooning. It's no longer high-speed rail. The Prop 1A, the initiative that provided the $9.95 billion in initial funding, the current project doesn't even resemble that project. I mean, the rail lines are going to share. They're going to share track with Caltrain in the Bay Area, so it's not going to be even high-speed rail. All the promises that they make for travel times and costs and private investment, none of that's coming true. Private companies have to make it come true because their own money's on the line, where the state, So it's a problem of state direction. And when it comes to water, the main problem is that the state isn't prioritizing the need for getting more water into the system. They're focused almost entirely on conservation. And Metropolitan Water District of Southern California talks about the big gulp, little sip. When we have big rainy seasons, you take a little more out and you store more of that water. We've had projects on the books, off-stream reservoir projects for decades that never get built. Shasta Dam was designed to be 100 feet taller than it is, and a proposal to boost it by 11 feet has been shot down. So we just need to store more water in wet years. So the Sierra snowpack is gone, and some of the environmentalists will say, well, what's the point of building more water storage when we don't have any water? We don't have any snowpack. We don't have any water. Well, that's true only if it never rains again. But as we know, looking through history, that it will rain again. We had quite a few rain events after the last drought, and we missed the opportunity to store a lot of that water to get us through this drought.
And in part, like you said, because we didn't maintain the Oroville Dam, we had to waste a lot of that water, or at least send it down further downstream to keep it from being a catastrophic situation more than it already was. When we look at the environmental conversation, the tug of war between, okay, let's make the Shasta Dam 11 feet taller and add this many more hectares of water. I mean, what is the cost there? Because in California, we do care about the environment, right? Like the Sierra Club is a powerful partner with those things. Do they overreach? Yes, of course, because every group wants more than what they need. But what is the cost of doing that? I mean, if we go ahead and take that much more land and put it underwater, is at some point we have to sacrifice something, right? We have to do something to deal with this, to manage more people, and then when we do have that big gulp of water, where to put it.
Right. Well, the arguments are always, well, there's the infrastructure cost. And of course, any project needs to be analyzed for its costs and benefits. The environmental concerns up there are folks who are fighting over the McClure River. But I in my view, it doesn't seem to impose much of a environmental cost to expand the reservoir at some point. There's a big effort to actually demolish dams and create more wild and scenic rivers. So like along the Klamath River, now those dams aren't really for water storage, they're hydro dams. But yeah, there's an environmental philosophy which is shared, I think, at the highest levels of our state government, that wants to river preservation at all costs. And yet we also have this need to feed more water into the system. My argument is that we can do both. I mean, we could just flushing more. The fish populations have been declining, so the state and federal policy of just flushing more water, pulse flows through the rivers, isn't saving fish populations. So, like the Delta project you mentioned, there's long been a need to fix the conveyance system in the Delta. The peripheral canal vote, well, we all know how that went. And the twin tunnels approach, which came out of Schwarzenegger and was advanced by Jerry Brown, and now is down to a single tunnel by Gavin Newsom. It's kind of like this tangled web of waterways, and the Sacramento River, hits the West Coast's biggest estuary. and then we see the delta smelt. We'll find a delta smelt at the pumps in Tracy, and that shuts down the water deliveries to the Southland. So the idea is to bypass that, right? It's not necessarily going to create any more water for the Southland, but it kind of bypasses it. And then the proposal would restore a lot of the habitats in the Delta, because the Delta is being, diminished environmentally, and it has for years through saltwater intrusion and subsidence. And, there used to be grizzly bear in the Delta 100 years ago. It was an incredible, it's still a beautiful area. It's mostly a farm area, but fixing our water problems can also help the environment. I guess that's my main point. Fighting over water flows, emptying reservoirs to save a handful of hatchery fish is not going to save the environment.
There's even an island called Grizzly Island out in the Delta. Yeah. I grew up in Benicia, right there at the edge of it, in the Delta.
Oh yeah. It's a nice old. Isn't that where the first one of the early capitals was in?
That was the first official state capitol building was in Benicia, and then they had a drunken deal and moved it to a swamp in Sacramento.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Benicia is a lovely town.
Yeah, it is, and it is right on the edge of the Delta, and it is different there now because of how we manage water. And I don't presume to know what the answer is, but I know that we can't all get what we want from our own interests, whether it's the farmers, even big ag, or Sierra Club and all the environmentalists. At some point we have to give something up, and maybe we can trade something. I know that the Sierra Club has this concept of preserving 30% of the land by 2030. And I think that's great. I mean, we've had a lot of presidents recently work on conservation and try to figure out how to do it. We had another environmental PhD guy. His name's Steve Running, and he talked about, like, if we're going to allow corporations to use the ground to extract resources, like for example oil, then they're obliged to also capture the gas that's there too, because that's also our resource, and venting it off into the atmosphere is wasting it. And so part of the cost of having that, there's ways to work around some of these things if you can sit at the table. But if everybody's pointing at each other and saying, you're white, you're a bigot, you're a monster who's a capitalist pig, and if we're all just pointing our fingers and yelling at each other, it doesn't seem like, Stephen, that we're in a position to even try to get along. I mean, we can't get along politically. We're not going to get along environmentally either.
Well, the more that things are determined by the government, the less we're going to get along, right? So things in the private. So I'm an advocate for property rights, and that I hear environmentalists say this kind of stuff all the time. Well, we want 30% of the land restored, or whatever percentage. I mean, what percentage of California's land is government owned anyway? It's 40-some%. And the more that the land is controlled in the public sector, the more it's made by political decisions, which is, I've covered a lot of city council meetings, and how they say democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. So all the stakeholders, right, whatever a stakeholder is, gets together and gets to decide what I do on my land. Well, you want to preserve 30% of the land. Are you preserving 30% of my land, or whose land is it? So I'm guessing it's not his own personal land that he wants to preserve. So I get tired of that kind of talk. I mean, we're not going to sit around and get along singing Kumbaya. The best way to get, to have productive public policy is to have more private decisions. I'm not calling for an end of any sort of regulation. I mean, but the proper role of government is to impose certain regulations to combat externalities, pollution, and that so forth. But the way to get more water is to let markets work better, and they're not having a bunch of people get together and argue what they'd like to have done with other people's land and with water. Now, water's tough because ownership rights of it are difficult. But in the East, we have riparian rights mostly. We have them here too, but it's mostly prior appropriation rights. And the riparian rights are tied to the ownership of your property because there's so much water, the river that runs through it. Where here, we developed the system out of, from the miners, first in time, first in right. We have to respect those rights. Those are actual property rights, just like my own ownership of my land is a property right. So I argue that we need more buying and selling and trading and more private decision making will solve the problem. Private companies do a much better job meeting the needs of consumers than government agencies, which do the most horrific job of doing anything. I mean, my home state of Pennsylvania, which has the highest per capita alcohol consumption in the country, they have a state-controlled liquor system, liquor store system that loses money. I mean, how do you lose money on a liquor store system? And last time I was back there, I walked into the only liquor store in a small town that I was in, and it was like walking into one of those Soviet package stores. So that's how government does things. Yeah, and it's true on anything, right? And you're in Orange County, the toll roads. Now that's not a truly private thing, but it was a privatized way to build freeways because the state wasn't building any freeways. So Orange County officials came up with that kind of system. So we need certainly more private actors in the water world.
Is this something, the tech sector often goes to, like a cryptocurrency based solution where when you purchase water, you're also exchanging value financially to invest in some water infrastructure or whatever it's going to be. There's a lot of environmental devices like that, where like tax credits for carbon and these other emission things. Is there a path through on that where we just increase the upfront cost of this, and then hopefully the money actually goes towards where it's supposed to go to, which would be a big hope? But is there a solution there? Because I know that the tech industry is desperate to try to create this stuff to fund things that are underfunded. I mean, there's all kinds of projects that don't get funded environmentally because there isn't government interest, right? But here we can build a platform where we can actually put some money in the bucket for things that really do matter to all of us.
Well, we have the greenhouse gas fund from the cap and trade system, and then everybody fights over whether to spend it on bike lanes or, I mean, that's, I'm just a cynic when it comes to government finding important things to fund, because I see how government funds things, and any decision made in the, any decision on public goods is just a bunch of people arguing over where they would like that money to be spent. So you're not going to get an efficient use of money that way. And I don't know what the solution is you're trying to find there, but the state's environmental priorities have held sway for a long time. Conservation. I was just at a TV show out in Arizona. Arizonans use less water now than they did in the 1950s, less in raw terms than in the 50s, when the population was 1/7 of its size. People are conserving, right? so this idea that we're all just totally despoiling the earth, and I don't know. We need more water for people. We need it for ag. We need it for environmental uses. So it's important. We can try to separate some of the water conveyance issues from the habitat. And like in the Delta, we should restore some of those habitats so that we have a permanent restoration of fish populations. But the environmentalists tend to oppose those plans also.
Well, they're standing up for the little guy, and there's a lot of little guys, and they get mad as hell. So I don't blame them for trying to stand up for things, and it is pretty hard to swallow when the big ag companies and all farmers, when they always sell that they're doom and gloom, and maybe they are going out of business at a rate that I don't understand, but they often come out and say, it's a 3-inch fish and we grow food. But if you're not a viable business because of government subsidies, or you have some other mechanism to keep you there artificially, maybe we do need to let some of these farms fail. Of course, that means that big ag will buy more farms, because that's how these systems work. But when we look at the farmers and the amount of water that they consume, is there a path out by simply saying it's illegal to grow almonds and alfalfa in California?
Well, I'm not a fan of taking people's private property or their water rights and just saying, no, you can't do that because we've decided. I do not think that it's wise to grow almonds in a particularly dry area. I'm not a farmer. That's why I believe in pricing. So if water is priced accurately, people will have the right incentives to grow what makes the most sense. So I'm not defending ag subsidies, and I'm not defending that sort of thing. But pricing is the best way to do it, and we don't need government officials or activists, deciding what other people can do with their property. And some of these environmental groups, I mean, they really do want to see a lot of the Central Valley go back to seed. And they believe, I mean, even in Mark Reisner's great book, Cadillac Desert, I mean, he argued that that people ought to live in what he called cancerous cities, that we should all be essentially live in the cities, and that have more of the the agricultural and rural regions kind of off limits from development and growth. And that's a pretty common environmental theme. And then we see what that's done in the far north of the state, right, with the lumber industry, where there aren't jobs and the small towns are drying up. I do not believe that there's anything wrong with resource industries or agriculture, and we need food, and we need reasonably priced food. I mean, talk about helping the poor, dramatically raising the price of food so that we could set more land aside for the enjoyment of people who leave the Bay or LA or Sacramento for the weekend is not, that's not my idea of good public policy.
We have a hang up with drinking processed water. I mean, here in Orange County, like you said, we do it well. Yeah, actually, well, that's kind of funny, but we do it, and it's good enough for astronauts. Why are we so adverse to this? I mean, we always talk about science. We're going to follow the science. Science says that we can take a lot of our water and put it right back into the pipe. Well, why do we struggle with this?
Oh, it's just, I don't think people are struggling with it so much anymore. I mean, in San Diego, the whole concept of toilet to tap, and I write about this in the book, which is sounds disgusting. That was promoted as I read. It was an LA Times story, I believe, that pinned it to. There was one of the big breweries in the area. This was back, I forget when. It must have been in the 90s. Didn't want to be tagged with using recycled water, so they called it, toilet to tap. And there was opposition, and there was a growing public opposition to a recycling plant, which is you treat wastewater, you inject it into the ground. It sits there for, I believe, 6 months before it's potable. In some areas like Fresno, they use it just for the purple pipes for reclamation uses, for gardening uses. But it's the water comes out, it's so clean that they have to add minerals back to give it taste. But no, it's growing in acceptance. I mean, it's well accepted in Orange County. I mean, I spent most of my career at the Orange County Register, and I don't recall people being upset at all over that. And in San Diego, they have a new pure water system, they call it, which is, that's where the resistance had grown originally, and they're doing that. And the state is advocating for it and trying to, make the regulations easier to do this. It's a great idea. Everyone seems to support it, and it's cost effective, and all water is recycled through our system anyway. So why not do it, as long as it's cleaned up properly and is safe and potable, which it is. So I don't see resistance to it anymore. And a lot of the resistance to things changes as water supplies decline. So Santa Barbara didn't want to connect to the State Water Project because a lot of people there believed it was growth inducing. You have more water and there's going to be more growth, which, that's a pretty anti-growth area. So I think a trailer on a 2-foot, 2,000 square foot lot's probably $2 million there now. So but then when there were extreme water shortages, a drought, I believe this was in the 90s also, they connected to the state water project. So as water becomes more scarce during a drought, I think any concerns about water recycling are going to evaporate.
When we look at, I mean, if this is a possible path that we can all agree about, how hard is it, and how many units do we need to create to process water back into potable?
Yeah, I am not sure on the technical details of how much would be needed and how much each area could produce, and the cost of the system. It's like anything; you just have to analyze everything, the cost and benefits. So, what do these treatment plants cost? What's the cost for the water that we get, and how much water do we need? I don't think it will meet. It won't meet all the needs of any community, but it could be a big and innovative part of it. So you add that, you have desalination, you store more water. In Southern California, it's not out of the question to discuss better stormwater capture. We see that during big rains, all that water that just goes out the line canals into the Pacific Ocean. That's costly, but necessity is the mother of invention, I suppose. So how much you're willing to spend depends on how much water you want. But there are a whole lot of these projects that we could be doing, but the state's focus has not been on providing more water into the system. And a lot of people and a lot of the environmentalists seem to believe that conservation is an end in of itself. It's like they're not trying to solve our water problems. They're trying to punish us for living our lives, right? Or punish the farms for just because they're corporate interests or whatever. Now, some of the rules, like there's a new groundwater management law called SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which is perfectly reasonable because you get the tragedy of the commons with water. So the groundwater is it's everybody, so it's nobody. So it's like in the old any of the economic discussions of the tragedy of commons. You have a pond filled with fish. No one has an interest in conserving the amount of fish in there and assuring that the fish are going to continue to thrive. Your interest is pulling as many fish out as you can as a fisherman, or else the next guy will get it. So that's what we get to some degree with the groundwater. But there's a pretty impressive study that I linked to, I discuss in my book, that shows the billions of dollars in ag income and the farm jobs that are going to be lost because of that act. So the key is to find new ways to get water to areas like in Kings County, where the farmers are almost wholly dependent on groundwater. So find other ways to get them water. So the farms need water. It's a totally legitimate. I don't think we want to see soaring food costs. And I don't think we, want to shutter farms. So, the farms need water. It's pretty important.
Is it fair to say that if we did manage the water better and we had more water, that more of the Central Valley would be turned into farms? I mean, not Tracy and Patterson, because that whole area is exploding. There's probably going to be 1 million people there in 10 years. But the areas that aren't always grown, they're let it be fallow. Are we just going to have this same problem again, just with a bigger pond to draw from?
What I mean, if you have a sustainable source of water, we'll have, sustainable farms. We're always going to have drought years. We're always going to have wet years. I mean, the ag industry, I mean, is an extremely important part of our state economy. And we just need to find ways. I think a policy of abundance through all sorts of ways. And I'm an advocate for people paying the true cost of the water that they get, just like the people should pay for the true cost of any service that they get. And that's why it's better to have most of these things, more market mechanisms rather than government mechanisms, because government, I mean, we look at how government spends money, anything like on these transportation bonds. So how's the city of Sacramento using its transportation money that's designed to reduce congestion? Well, they're actually reducing the number of road lanes, putting us on road diets. And the argument is that there'll be fewer fatalities if they gum up the traffic through downtown Sacramento. So those kind of insane policies, that's what government specializes in. And I just don't believe in putting more power in the hands of bureaucrats. We have so many agencies and bureaucracies. I mean, to argue that, farms and private businesses in this state aren't sufficiently regulated is pretty crazy.
I was on a commission that was in Solano County, and we were a subcommittee that looked at pedestrian, and then the other committee was bike things. And we looked at all kinds of crazy things like bulb outs and different ways to protect people crossing the street. And I would just raise my hand and I would say, where in the county is crossing the street a problem? Where are people getting waylaid? Where can we reduce the harm? Well, one guy got hit here. A couple of years ago, one guy got hit over there. Well, then why are we talking about changing anything in these other areas where people aren't getting hit? Like we weren't able to marshal these things well. And then they always wanted to paint these stupid, and I'm really critical of these things because I saw the machine work. We would be pitched an idea by a consultant who basically is a government contractor. And this is how you can beautify this area. And we're going to put in these bike lanes. And like, we already have bike lanes. It's in the law. They're already there. You don't have to paint them green. And nothing bugs me more, Stephen, than to see empty buses and empty green lanes for bikes that no one's using because someone had an idea that would somehow improve things. Money is too precious to waste on these things. I totally agree that the government fails at this too often because, again, there's an industry designed around how can we spend this money at the city, at the county level. Meanwhile, in Solano County, you have all these emerging neighborhoods that are 70 years old, but now they have 100,000 people in them, and they're not equipped for crossing the street. In all these different areas, there aren't enough lights for protecting crossers. But we're going to spend it in established areas on beautification as opposed to other things. So you're totally right about that, and it is completely aggravating. Road diets are dumb, and I just don't ever see them working. I want to get back. Well, first off, let me just plug the book here real quick. Everybody go to Amazon. I'll put the link. It's in the bottom of the thing there. It's called Winning the Water Wars. California Can Meet Its Water Needs by Promoting Abundance Rather Than Managing Scarcity. And it's just it's good lay down. You hear him talking about all these different facets and factors going into trying to sort out how to manage this. Is anybody doing a good job with this? I mean, is there a state that's like really got its water management down where it's got a closed system that just never runs out and it works? Can we follow somebody else's lead for once?
Well, it's kind of hard because, a lot of the states that don't have water problems. I mean, I grew up back east, lived in the Midwest, and they've got, their water problems is that they usually have too much of it. So it's hard to compare. I mean, I've done some media in, some of the other Western states, Colorado and Utah and Arizona, and they're all having, severe water problems. And, a lot of, we've had to cut back on our Colorado River allotments as part of the compact, as the other Western states, have been growing so significantly. So water, it's a hard one. It's a hard one to point to another state. But we can point to Pat Brown, the former governor Pat Brown, who his approach was we just need to build the infrastructure needed to meet the needs of the population, and he was he was the father of the State Water Project, and I think it would take longer to do a environmental impact report for one segment of something like that than it would to build the whole thing. And again, I'm not arguing to roll back all environmental rules or anything like that. If anyone who reads my book sees that, although I'm critical of certain elements of the environmental community and many of our environmental policies, it's not some anti-environmental screed. It's very important to take care of the environment, protect habitats. I've gotten in this argument with some people who say, well, we just need to stop letting the water run to the sea. Well, we don't want to bleed all the rivers dry. So not all of that 50% that goes to the sea can just be turned off, but we can take a bigger portion of it, and we can stop setting aside more of the water system, the rivers off limits from any human uses, and we can reduce some of the rules during drought times, like when I had pointed to the new Maloney's reservoir. One of the water officials was arguing that we ought to have some off ramps during severe droughts so that we're not draining reservoirs to save a small number of fish. So there are a lot of things we can do. We can streamline all sorts. I detail a lot of the regulatory rules that can be streamlined, but the big problem is this focus. The focus on more water, and how do we get more water? How do we meet the needs of people? Conservation's fine, but we're not going to conserve our way out of a water problem that's built on years of under constructing the infrastructure that we need. It's kind of like our freeway systems. I remember when Gray Davis essentially declared that the era of freeway building was over back when he cut the ribbon for the Foothill Freeway East, the 210 in San Bernardino County. And sure enough, it was largely over, and our roads they get more congested. When I moved to the state in the 90s, I think it was like 32 million people. So we've added more people than any of the other states I've lived in, or nearly as many. And the era of freeway building's over. So the era of congestion has arrived. So, focus is on. So what we have is we have a problem. The state officials believe more in social engineering than civil engineering. So we have all these plans to create all the urban growth boundaries that limit housing construction, and we're all supposed to take rail, even though transit ridership is at almost historic lows, and it would be impossible for where many people live to efficiently take transit to where they want to go. But the focus is on changing our habits so that we rely on transit and live in high density neighborhoods, which just happens to be not what most people want. Now, I'm totally fine with some of these housing bills. In fact, I support the housing bills that allow higher densities to be built. I like the idea of eliminating single family only zoning. That doesn't ban single family homes. It just says that you can also build duplexes and some other things. I'm fine with those things, but I'm not fine with banning the construction of other types of homes outside of urban growth boundary and then forcing us by state edict to live in places not everyone wants to live anyway. And why do you think we have a housing crisis? Because the state has so severely restricted supply that the median home price in California is over $800,000. That's statewide. That includes the Central Valley and the rural areas, right? That's crazy. It's like 350 nationwide. Yeah. So how is that helping poor people? You talked about these environmental groups helping the little guy. They're not helping the little guy. They're helping wealthy people who already have their homes, right? Most people I know want to have a chance at the American dream and to have a home and at least some kind of yard and affordable water, affordable electricity. They don't want to sit in traffic all day long. And these policies are driving up the costs of all of those things and making it really unaffordable for people, especially working class people, and providing a handout, which is the state continually increase social welfare spending. That's not what most people want. And these environmental policies are driving these costs. So you tie up more land from any productive use. Look at in those rural areas where you can't log anymore, or it's difficult to ranch thanks to government regulations. How are you supposed to earn a living?
I was watching a video about the Owens Valley because that's a big area of concern, and I guess we can kind of conclude on this topic, but we look at the systems as you stack them, right? And so the Owens Valley is contributing the most dust of anywhere in the United States. And so now LA County, which owns a lot of that land, has built a multi-billion-dollar sprinkler system to keep the ground wet because it's a lake bed. And so that keeps the dust down. And God bless, good idea. But then when the water comes flooding through in those gulp years, when we have a lot of water, they're like, oh my God, it's going to damage the sprinkler system, push more water out. And so like this sprinkler systems becomes integral because it's so damned expensive as this way to fix this thing instead of some other solution that might involve re-flooding the Owens Valley, hurrying up with the Mono Lake reclamation. I mean, these projects that we need water for these things. And again, this goes to your thing overall, like let's increase our storage capacity in a way that makes sense so that we can deal with some of these things. I mean, I would love to see the Owens Valley go back to what it's supposed to be. And that's probably good for the environment, but we can't get along good enough to even have that conversation. And both sides would sue each other until this never happens.
Well, they're both sides want a different thing. So I don't believe the dust problem in the Owens Valley is nothing like the problem that's coming in, the Salton Sea as that's been drying up, which it's drying up, and the cost to what there have been a number of congressional proposals that right. I don't even know what the amounts were, but there's certainly nobody has the money to restore it. But that dust is somewhat dangerous. So yeah, a lot of these battles are you're not going to avoid these battles, but more water would help everybody, and our state needs to focus on how to get more water into the system. So in Israel, I have a chapter on Israel and how. Yeah, they had their existential problem. It was, in fact, the 6-Day War was fought in part over the diversions of the Jordan River, and they've entirely solved their problem with desalination, and they're able to feed water from the desal plants back into reservoirs and rivers and solve environmental problems. So I'm not just pitching desal, but if we come up with ways to store more water, we can take care of everybody. And that has not been the focus, and it needs to be the focus.
I would, and I'll say this, and I'll put this on you. But when we have these environmental groups that do this, they want to tie their hands behind their back as they try to solve these complex problems and deal with ethnicity and race and all these other things that are ideological. Like we have a real problem here to solve. Let's try to get to the essence of the problem and work on that, and then ameliorate outside of that, right? So we have these things like desal, or you want to keep fuel and gas in the ground instead of using that land and extracting that resource. Okay, then let's talk legitimately about nuclear. I mean, these two things are the way out because petrochemicals have so much potential energy in them. It's hard. The sun can't beat that. The wind can't beat that. It'll never beat it. And so it'll always be valuable, and it'll always be something worth extracting, at least as long as we're unwilling to look at nuclear as a viable option to back up things. So we have all these things where like you have to give something. You can't just have this perfect solution where everybody gets what they want, because it's not viable, man. Right?
Well, I live within a view of the shuttered nuclear facility up here that the environmentalists put out of business in the 70s. What's this? I forget, but yeah, I don't know about nuclear, but and I don't think people are going to get along. We just need strong leadership with the right objective in the water area. So, but. Anyway, I appreciate your having me on the show. And
yeah, it was fun. Well, hopefully we had a slightly different conversation than the one you normally have, but I appreciate you coming on and talking about this in depth with me.
Well, great. Thank you.
Stand by one sec. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you